Greetings my hardware enthusiasts. Today I'm taking a look at a pretty awesome, rather unconventional, smaller form factor PC case, which could possibly mark the next step in the PC case history, depending on how you may want to look at it. This, my friends, is the Antec Dark Cube, and it might be the most versatile compact case on the market right now, but it also does come with a few surprises, not all of which can be considered good ones, but certainly the Dark Cube does a lot right, that's for sure. At the time of this video, you'd be spending about $190 on this beauty, which definitely is quite the hefty amount of money for a case. But why it costs that much money, you'll find out in today's video. I do, however, want to remain fully transparent towards you, my audience, and therefore want to let you know that this video is being sponsored by Antec, and I do get paid to produce this video. Every little penny will be wisely spent on the channel growth, though. And since I, just as much as you do, personally highly value honest, unbiased opinions and ratings, I can assure you Antec has absolutely no influence on any of what I'm about to say about this case. Right away, let me point out, Antec will certainly not like all I have to say today. There is going to be some critique after all. But what makes the Dark Cube so special, and could it be the right choice for you? Included besides the default pre-installed mesh front panel, there's also a glass panel included for you glass fanatics out there. On top of that, we are also getting a little plastic box with all that accessories such as screws and velcro straps. The remaining box we could then reuse to store all kinds of our screws used to build PCs. Very useful since there are these different walls we can put in between those compartments. Man, I'm easily entertained. Now, as far as aesthetics of this Dark Cube go, I gotta admit it does appear a bit weird at first, but I got used to it fairly quickly, and now I kinda like the design elements they've gone for. The very first thing I noticed already during the unboxing procedure was the incredibly high build quality, which also does show in terms of weight, over 10 kilograms. That being said, it's pretty much an upside-down case we're looking at here. That describes it fairly well, since we are indeed talking of an inverted case, meaning the hardware has to be installed on the exact opposite side of what we are usually used to, and that upside down. Usually I'm really not into these types of cases, but with today's mini ITX build, I don't really have anything against it. Although I definitely had a few minor to slightly more severe issues when it comes to fitting all that hardware in the exact spots I want them to be, and in the end I had to settle for compromises, to which we'll get a bit later into the video. The case for the most part consists of steel, 3mm thick aluminum alloy, and tempered glass. Of course, here and there are some plastic elements to spot. What immediately catches one's eye is the fact that the Dark Cube, generally speaking, appears very glass-like. This probably is due to the fact that on the left and right, as well as on the top, the case is equipped with fairly dark tinted glass panels. In theory, you could also swap out the mesh front for a glass panel. That would, however, limit airflow. Without the need for screws, just a little bit of force, those two glass panels come off. The top one, on the other hand, is not removable. When inspecting the rear, you'll right away spot that carrying handle, which happens to be out of plastic, but it does make a very robust impression, although I wouldn't trust that handle blindly with a fully loaded high-end system in there. And now, hold on tight. By removing 4 thumb screws, you can easily slide out the whole main frame of the case on rails pretty much. This is a so-called slide open case structure, and I really happen to like that interesting concept. You don't get to see something like this very often. Since Antec has nicely hidden 4 lighting bars in 4 corners in the front, and since those happen to be on the outer shell of the case, just like those front panel ports, they've brought to life a rather peculiar proprietary connection interface based on PCI Express. Well, why not actually? It's one way to get the job done, I guess. And while we're at it, besides audio ports that automatically can sense whether you've plugged in headphones or a microphone, there are 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, as well as a modern USB Type-C 3.2 Gen 2 port on board. At a price of $190, this should very much be expected though. On the I/O panel board, we are also being offered 3 4-pin PWM fan headers, which can be controlled via a single PWM connector by one's motherboard. Same applies to the three 3.5-volt ARGB headers on here. Those that do not have the option to do so can control and change the lighting, color and effects by using the case's LED button. The choice of good effects is fairly limited though, in my opinion. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that this case does not support any regular full-size ATX motherboards. Instead, we're getting green light for micro ATX and of course mini ATX. Despite this smaller form factor, we luckily don't have to rely on SFX power supplies. We therefore can continue using our more affordable ATX units even with a length of up to 220mm. Even high air coolers and long graphics cards seem to be welcome, albeit there's something you should watch out for, more on that shortly. When paying $190, many will be shocked to discover that Antec does not include or have any fan pre-installed in here. Others, however, take this lightly and simply install their favorite fans in there, but still, I personally would have liked seeing at least 2 fans included in the accessories. So I had to mount 2 of my own ones I had flying around. That being said, in the front there's room to mount up to 2 120 or 140mm fans. On the rear you could fit a 120mm one. Obviously, you won't be able to mount anything of that sort to the top, since all we get is glass there. Despite the limited room to work with, in theory at least, you still could mount up to a 240mm radiator in the front and a 120mm one on the rear. By removing the screw for this nicely placed hard drive bracket, we are given the option to screw one 2.5-inch SSD onto it in 2 orientations and showcase it on the main side, and right behind it you can neatly screw in a 3.5-inch drive. Needless to say, dust filters have not been forgotten. On the bottom for the PSU, there's a removable one integrated into the Dark Cube's outer shell. And then for the front, it depends what panel you're actually going for, mesh or tempered glass. The mesh panel comes with a dust filter integrated, which if you so desire, can be removed by loosening a few screws. Now what can I tell you about my experience building into this case? Well, let's start with the positive things. My current hardware configuration fits into the Dark Cube without any issues. Albeit, I have to admit, I initially had planned on installing a 240mm AIO liquid cooler in there, which in itself wasn't really an issue actually. Well, except for the fact that the radiator's fittings, or rather its tube end, did interfere with my long RTX 3090 graphics card. I tried again and again, but it simply didn't work out. Alternatively, I could have installed a radiator with a tubing on the bottom where there's plenty of space. But as we know by now, this would cause air bubbles to build up inside the AIO's loop and would impact the pump's lifespan, so that wasn't an option for me. In the end, I just went with an air cooler, but even with that one, I ran into a few issues. One lesson I had to learn was that air coolers with 140mm fans are a no-go. So I was forced to go with an air cooler sporting a 120mm fan, and with such I finally didn't really run into any noteworthy clearance issues. Still, I should point out that attaching that one fan clip near the PSU shroud turned out to be a bit of a challenge, but it worked out. This does depend on the motherboard's form factor, and even that depends on the socket's positioning. In hindsight, it becomes clear to me that the Dark Cube does a much better job with micro ATX boards. It seems this is what Antec has primarily had in mind with this particular case. So those of you that want to go with mini ATX definitely should pay very close attention and not get too large components. Unfortunately, I had to scrap my plan of installing another ARGB fan on the rear, since a fan with a standard thickness by this much didn't fit in there anymore. I was very impressed by how well this case handles graphics cards though. Keep in mind, we are dealing with an RTX 3090 here. It's a fairly long GPU, so close to every single thick and long high-end graphics card should definitely be able to fit in here. Very, very impressive indeed. This is the aspect most other compact cases fail at. It's easier making compromises with CPU cooling than with one's graphics card. All in all, I personally believe that Antec has focused on the right priorities here, even though many of those mentioned clearance issues easily could have been avoided if the case were just a few millimeters bigger. Noteworthy is the nice side of one's graphics card, which can be looked at through the tinted glass at the top, a nice way to showcase the GPU properly. Now, what's the airflow like? Well, other than what I've initially expected, I was pleasantly surprised. Especially the CPU and the motherboard get a lot of fresh air that gets drawn in by those front-mounted fans I installed. The graphics card, on the other hand, admittedly doesn't get as much of that fresh air since the GPU's fans need to suck in air through the top. But luckily, on each side, there's two kinds of air vents meant to aid with GPU cooling. Not an optimal solution, but at least the graphics card doesn't suffocate, so it does somewhat get the job done. Cable management. My initial plan was to hide and tuck away as many cables as possible, as usual. And that worked out perfectly until came the moment I had to put those two case elements together again on its rails. Turns out it's not supposed to be done that way, since a lot of the cables get tangled up on the rail's frame. I therefore had to go back to my special cable spaghetti technique I had practiced for many years. I simply abandoned the cables in the power supply compartment like in the old days. It's a good thing the tempered glass has a pretty dark tint to it, so you don't really see any mess anyway, and I guess that's all according to Antec's plan. So all in all, while I sure had a few issues with the Antec Dark Cube, since close to everything needed rethinking in terms of room management, one also should not forget that I successfully managed to install an amazing high-end system into this small form factor case, an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X along with an RTX 3090, and that is without any of those components suffocating. This, my friends, in my opinion, deserves some applause. Also because a standard ATX power supply can be used. So while the Antec Dark Cube sure might not be for everyone out there, it may as well be exactly right for very specific enthusiasts that want something more eye-catchy, special in a smaller form factor, without having to be completely limited when it comes to component choice. The build quality is top-notch, and that special concept with that slide-open rail case structure sure is almost one of a kind, but that also is very noticeable in terms of pricing. How many of you enthusiasts are actually ready to pay this much? I don't know. Other than that, I can definitely recommend this case, albeit you should pay fairly close attention to what kind of components you plan on installing in there. Don't go overboard with sizes, obviously. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. Take care, everyone.